Well, if you're a fan of the Da Vinci Code, the movie with Tom Hanks, or maybe the book by Dan Brown, you might recall that in the story there was a container. They referred to it as a cryptex. I certainly was not the first one to make one of these in the woodworking world. They've been around for a number of years. Here's one unique example made by a friend of mine in New Hampshire, David Belser. A great place to stash away a rare bottle of wine. And here's what my design looks like. This is more or less a fancy bicycle lock. Most of these kind of devices have letters or numbers or symbols around these, and you have to align the rings to possibly spell out a word or something like that. In my design, I've simply used different species of wood and written a little riddle that reveals that Babinga is the key. And this is Babinga wood here, if you can see these pieces of Babinga. And they have to be arranged just a certain way. Obviously the owner of this box needs to know the arrangement in order to open the box. It's not an easy thing to open. You can see I've got these little black dots here. This is the alignment of where things need to be arranged. So I'm carefully aligning this row in order to form a diamond with my Babinga. So there's only one position of all these rings that will open this. So now we've got the right combination. As you can see here, there's a slot down the middle, and there's an inner core surrounded by these dark rings which have been glued to the core, and they are all slotted. And then there's one spot on each of these rings where there's a slot in the ring that lines up so that you have a clear passage all the way down through the container. The container itself, which fits in here, has these pegs which line up behind each ring. And they're trapped behind each ring until the gap is arranged so they can be pulled out. So as far as components go, we've got an inner ring, we've got these glued on, separator rings that are slotted. Then we have these dial rings. Of course, there's an end cap here. The container is simple stacked ring construction. It's had a cap also glued on this end. The inside of this is revealed by twisting off the end here, which reveals a container inside. I've used some ABS plumbing fittings for threads and created this secret box inside. One of the mistakes I made, which I don't plan on making on the next one, is where this lid is, I've got a peg. It has to be pretty tight to line up, and if the wood moves at all, that might not be possible. So the next one I do, I'm not going to put a peg on this cap. This was designed to sit on a cradle, but what I think I'm going to do on this next one, change this end and have it stand vertically, such as this. So to get started, the first key component is this inner sleeve. I turned this particular one from a block of mahogany, much like this one. And so I'll probably do one more using a solid block of mahogany. And I think at the same time I'm going to make a second one, and instead of using a solid block, I'm going to cut myself some staves out of this piece of mesquite. I'll mill this down, get some layers out of it, cut some simple staves, and create this inner ring out of stave construction instead of solid construction. And while I'm at milling this mesquite, I take this board of blue mahoe. It's got a crack, which I'll have to work around. But I'm going to mill myself some material out of this in order to create the separator rings here. So my first step is to get this big thick piece of mesquite milled. I'm going to end up with 3 boards, a little less than 3/4 of an inch in thickness. So 4 passes on the table saw, followed by a pass on the bandsaw just to cut that last little web out of place. And then a couple passes through the drum sander. I've got some nice material to cut staves from. This is very dry mesquite. Here I'm cross-cutting it a little more than 8 inches long. This is my boards that I'll go to the table saw with. But first I need to get this sled adjusted just right. Now, in the interest of saving some space on this DVD, I'm not going to go through the whole process of cutting staves on this table saw sled. If this is unfamiliar territory for you, I've done a pretty thorough job on both DVDs number 3 and 4. There are some lessons there that talk about cutting staves using a table saw sled. A quick review of those lessons might be in order. It is important, however, that my sled setup, my stop block position, be positioned in order to create a cylinder with an inside diameter just under 2.5 inches. It takes a little bit of trial and error to get that just right. This test ring told me that my staves are just a little too wide. My inside diameter is slightly over 2.5 inches. I want it slightly under. So a slight adjustment with the stop block in towards the blade, just a smidgen, and another couple of staves in order to really dial this inside diameter, just under 2.5 inches is what I want. This one came right on. It's a good 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch less than 2.5. So now I'm over cutting my staves, putting them together, doing a dry fit, getting ready to glue these together. This tape will help keep everything aligned. The dry fit confirms that my angles are right on. I'll slit this masking tape. This will be ready now for the glue job. The glue job's pretty straightforward. A lot of Type Bond 3. Type Bond 3 will give me a little bit more time. Notice this stick I'm using to spread the glue. It's a cutoff from when I cut my staves. It has a sharp edge which allows me to get into that crevice. A lot of rubber bands starts the clamping process, and to maximize pressure I'm using this stretch wrap. I'll use about 3 10-foot pieces of that, just going round and round. Provides a lot of pressure. I let these sit overnight. I've got 2 cylinders of mesquite which will provide the inner sleeve, and I've got this one dark cylinder which I'll harvest the separator rings from. Cutting this stuff off is kind of messy, but you end up with a pretty good cylinder ready to go on the lathe. Using the tailstock cone as a centering device and my chuck, I can mount this up and just make it round. Now, to give me a better grip, I'm going to form a little tenon here on this one end, turn it around so I've got a good grip on that one end, again using my tailstock cone to help center it. The hollowing, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use a Forstner bit. I've turned just a little shallow starter area there, and I'm just feeding a 2.5-inch Forstner bit all the way down through here. That 2.5-inch drill bit does a really nice job of giving me a straight, smooth interior wall. A little sanding, and I'm ready to go. With the inside done, I can now turn the outside down to a consistent wall thickness. I want something under 1/4 inch. It needs to be a nice consistent wall thickness. I'm setting my calipers there to make sure the outside of this does not get smaller than the inside of that dark cylinder. So I've turned those little grooves. That'll give me a guideline as to where to turn to. Get this nice and smooth, consistent, little shear scraping, and followed by some sanding. But here's a little tip. I'm making sure that one end of this, that left hand end, is just a tiny bit bigger than the right hand end. Just a smidgen. That'll come in handy when I put the separator rings on there. I'll be able to slide them from one end and still have nice snug fits at each location. Part this off, and this is ready for the next step. For my next step, I'm going to start working on the small dark wood separator rings. Here's a cylinder of staves that was glued together, just getting it round, and I'll put a tenon at both ends of this. Then I'm going to split this into two pieces. It's just going to be a lot easier to harvest my short rings out of a shorter cylinder. So it's a matter of hollowing the inside, carefully sneaking up on a fit to the outside of those mesquite cylinders, getting that just to fit just right. Then I'll turn the outside of this, getting a nice smooth surface with a consistent diameter from end to end. I've probably ended up with a thickness from inside to outside at least 3/8, maybe a strong 3/8. Here I'm using a marking gauge. I've set it just under 1/2 inch. This little score mark will give me a place to consistently part these off. So a little parting action, a little more hollowing, checking, marking, parting. I'll generate a series of these little short stave constructed rings. I'll need 6 rings for each box. It doesn't hurt to have a couple extras. Remember, I had this piece of mahogany. This is what I made my first Cryptex box from. Same kind of procedure. I didn't have to go through the whole process of assembling staves. The same 2.5 inch drill bit. This drill is pretty easy. It's fairly soft wood, but if you make one of these using a large piece of solid wood, make sure it's super dry wood. You don't want that moving on you later on. This piece has been in my possession for quite a few years. It tested at less than 7%. A nice sharp Forstner bit really does save a ton of time with turning, and it probably produces a better surface than I could do with turning tools. For my next step, I'm going to put a coat of thick CA glue both outside and inside of these 3 tubes. This will give me a very durable surface. It'll help stabilize the wood. Maybe not necessary, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to do that. Back to the separator rings. I want a nice smooth surface on one side or one end of all these little short stave constructions. A little swirling motion takes care of that. Here are all my separator rings and my 3 inner sleeves. The fits are not exact, but I can adjust that later, as you'll see. But I do want these rings to be a very consistent thickness or height. Some thin strips of double-sided tape on a board of melamine, mounting these and passing them through the drum sander, a number of passes, finishing off with 120 grit. Getting these off that tape can be a little ticklish. They're very fragile, but with some caution, they come off okay. There will be some sticky tape residue. Just a second or so on the disc sander takes care of that. Here I've got a sloppy fitting jam chuck post. This allows me to put these rings on and off without stopping the lathe. I'll hit these corners with my power sander. 180 grit paper puts a nice little radius on these corners. It's pretty quick and easy to do it this way. If you don't feel comfortable doing it this way, just stop and start the lathe. Here's something I rarely do. I'm using some dark stain on these separator rings. I just